Welcome back to African Voices. You're back with Tchiyiwe Chihana, Nkululeko Sibanda, and John Rwoth-Omack. And we asked you talking about the play that is called Far Gone, that's been written by John, covering child soldiers, the Lord's Resistance Army, and other peripheral issues that are quite contingent to a topic like this. Just before we went on break, we were talking about the diaspora and how much we invest into priorities such as what we do with our time versus how we can engage in the arts. And Nkululeko, you were saying...
Look, as John was saying, I thought that it is important to engage questions of how it is important to raise our children. We're talking about child soldiers. What happens to them when they become child soldiers is that they're taken away from their families. They're taken away from being able to anchor their own being from their families and who they are supposed to be, to create a personality. And we are doing the same thing. I mean, yes, you may be raising children in the United Kingdom, but if they're being raised by the television, that's a child soldier you have in the house.
Absolutely.
You've got to realize that, and we've got to extricate ourselves. And one of the things that our Sheffield families can do, or anywhere else in the country, is to tune in to this play. Go and watch it with your family.
Absolutely.
Miss that shift. Just go and take part. That will be a big and huge present to the spirit of your children, to the soul, to them understanding who they are. When they hear stories such as this of child soldiers, and they hear them from others without a parent sitting next to them, they hum them. But if they hear the stories sitting next to mom and dad, asking those questions that nobody else can explain, it gets to the core of why such a story is important, and it becomes a strength rather than a weakness.
Can I just add to that?
Go ahead.
In doing my research, I read a book called When the Walking Defeats You, and it's about one man's journey. He chose to join the LRA and become Joseph Kony's bodyguard. But there's a line in that book that really got me, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something along the lines of that children make the best soldiers because they haven't yet discovered who they are. They haven't yet formed an identity. They're young enough to be trained to be the best machines of killing machines of human beings, but an adult,
literally grooming,
you can't do that to an adult because they've got
limits.
They've developed morals already.
They know their yeses and their nos.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
It can go so far and no further.
And there's something very pivotal in this play. Yes, I think what I'm very happy with that I've managed to do with this play. I just finished the script yesterday. Yes, it's a play about the LRA. It's a play about children. It's a play about the British history. It's a play about war. It's a play about, but most importantly, it's a play about a family.
Great stuff.
It's a play about a family getting torn apart.
You are an artist.
And definitely an artist. Trust me. I have been mentored by this young man a lot of times.
You're giving me way more credit than I deserve. But yeah, this is a play about family. It's a play about how the worst a family can go through. And I won't tell you more, because if I tell you more, I'll ruin the play for you.
We just have to come, don't we?
The most important thing, the central thing here is family.
Let me ask you about the expertise behind the play. Who's your producer? Do we have African representation supporting you? Usually with things like this, it's usually Arts Council funded. The venue is probably very Western. But are there any Africans backing you in producing this particular play?
I'll just say before I answer that the best thing I've done, apart from putting the play on and writing it and stuff, is the team I've gathered around me.
You're proud of yourself.
I'm actually
let us judge you. Tell us.
No, I'm actually the weakest link in the team, if anything. I'm surrounded with very talented people. Our director is Moji Karim, who's who's the artistic director for Utopia Theatre. And Utopia Theatre is
We've had her on African Voices.
Oh, have you?
Phenomenal woman,
yeah, there you go. And Utopia Theatre is the one that hosted South Africa Festival.
Absolutely,
so, of Nigerian heritage. Very proud to have on the team. There's Lee Afen, who is half Nigerian, half British, and he's a sound designer. First time working with him, he's a genius. I can't wait to just see what we unravel. The dramaturg I have is Paul Serrett. Now, Paul is British.
Bad Blood Blues.
But he wrote...
That's him, isn't it?
Yes, he wrote a play that I first directed, and it's fascinating. It's actually one of the best plays set in Africa that I've read. It's written by a white British man, you know, and it was genius. So very lucky to have him on here.
So what role does he have?
He's a dramaturg. So a dramaturg is somebody who's assisting the writer to make sure that the story makes sense, that the audience gets it, that every pivotal moment, every important moment is at the right place. You know, that the framework of the story is well equipped.
So where did you get the boldness to do so much for? This is your biggest project as far as I'm aware.
Yes.
You're writing it, creating it, and acting it. Where did that boldness come from? Usually you find people will write something and there'll be different actors, but you're doing the whole works.
I would say I'm writing it and acting in it. Creating it is the team.
Team altogether, yeah.
Is the team. I'm an actor. I trained as an actor. So the acting part, yes, hard. I won't say anything is easy because it's not. It's a one-man show, so I'm very privileged to be able to tell this story by myself. But the writing of it, I actually went to Paul and said, Paul, I have this idea. But before I went to Paul, I'd gone to like 3 or 4 other writers of African heritage. And I pitched the idea to them, and they were like, yes, I really want this play. I really want to write this play. But nothing...
It didn't work. It didn't spark.
Yeah. And then I went to Paul. I was like, I've directed this play, you know, Paul Serrett. Let me pitch the idea to Paul. I trust him, you know. I pitched it to him, and he caught me out. He said, no. You should write it. And that was it. But I said, yes, okay, thank you for the challenge. I'll write it, but I'll need you to help me make sure that it's...
That's very inspiring. Yeah. So I'm going to go back a little bit to the politics of the LRA and a bit of history. So in the 1860s, specifically, when the British were in Uganda, they invested quite heavily in the southern parts of Uganda in agriculture and different things, whereas the north itself, where the Lord's Resistance Army has got a strong base and foundation and was born out of, predominantly did not have any sort of investment as far as that is concerned. So what they did was they got the labor from the north and took it down to the south. And those in the south that did not have any sort of big economic activities going on became more militant and more resistant. And eventually, this is the sort of structure that you still see in Uganda. The north of Uganda is still poorer, and the south of Uganda has got better investments and better livelihoods, and people tend to. Yes. But that's the birthing of the militant north of Uganda. So there's a bit of British history, given that we are in the United Kingdom, and we do have a colonial history within Anglophone Africa. It's important to actually position this where it actually started. Any thoughts on that, Nkululeko?
Well, look, I think that skillfully the colonization required deliberate planning. And that, in my view, was part of the planning. If you go to any country, that's what they did. Different places were developed differently. And then when you were handing over power, you would hand it over to the less militant of the groups or the cultures or the tribes. And what that meant is that the people you're handing over to would always feel indebted to Britain in order to continue to require British support in order to suppress the more militant of the side. So, and the unfortunate part of this story is that sort of neo-imperialist approach or position, if you like, continues. I mean, the involvement of the Americans supporting Museveni also put a spin to the whole thing. So, look, that country is still a huge theater.
Absolutely. Yeah, massive. I think, oh God, colonialism. I think one thing that was so clever about colonialism, very clever, and kudos, was they brought two things that the British came with to, well, in this particular case, Uganda. They brought a gun and they brought a Bible. You know, and you had those two contradicting items. You know, so the Bible is there by the missionaries to preach peace. You know, to teach you to be, you know, good. Your morals are challenged.
Subservient, listening, subservient. Obey me. Yeah.
Listening. But hey, here's a gun. Play with it. You know, and that's exactly what was done in Uganda. You had the South having power, and then you have the North. Although not being as invested in as much, still there was some investment. So they were also giving weapons and stuff. And it gets to a point where the two have to fight. They have to fight.
Yeah.
You know, there has to be a fight.
For resources.
Which leads us to the first prime minister, even when Uganda gets independence.
Yes.
Milton Obote. He's the prime minister, not the president, the prime minister of the country, under a king, a southern king, Kabaka, which is king in Luganda. But then what happened? Was
Milton Obote also from the south, or was he from the north?
Milton Obote is north.
So you had a king from the south and a prime minister from the north. So you had a British
system.
Okay.
Where the prime minister was under the king.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the south that's ruling, but with the northern prime minister.
Okay.
And what Obote does, he betrays the prime minister. I mean, no, the king, and that again, then caused a lot of hate between the south and the north.
So you see, colonialism has and Africans, and this is what I think we said last week in the show, that look, Africans have to get to a stage where we begin to, and I think we're slowly moving to that stage. This generation of African leaders that has emanated from the liberation struggles is slowly fizzling away, and the hope is that the new generation has a much more nuanced and a much more a deeper understanding of the purpose of statehood of countries and the role that each country plays and the place it takes in the international system, the international order of things. A lot of Africans and a lot of our leaders continue to run our countries in such a way that it is apparent and continues to be apparent that we are and will always be dependent. And that we can always complain that the British have done this to us, the Americans have done this to us. Nobody gets things done to them without them doing something.
Yeah, we are waiting for the French president to back us up.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, but I always find the French situation very controversial, because as far as French influence in Francophone countries in Africa, it's still there. It's still a ruling power, if you will. I feel like
it's
yeah. I think that's the word. Pervasive.
It's dangerous. It's uncaring. It's daring. You see, the British neo-imperialist has a way of doing these things, at least under cover of darkness at night. So you won't know what is done until it's happened. But because of that, it then is tempered with, such that it doesn't have an obvious and instant impact. So you're going to have conflicts in Anglophone Africa, but you're not going to have unending wars that are supported and empowered. They will support probably for international policy reasons, a coup somewhere, but they will simply walk out of that. And so the number of people you have killed in Anglophone Africa because of this or that conflict, as time goes by, is becoming smaller and smaller. So you're going to get to a point where people aren't being killed physically; they will die of hunger and other things. But in Francophone Africa, it's murder day in, day out, and they will send in their soldiers in there to take over the state. They will send in their private companies to buy off the whole country, and these countries and these leaders remain with nothing.
With nothing
I
at
don't
all.
understand why
Nothing at all. Can we just? Unfortunately, it looks like we're going to be running out of time pretty soon. So I'm just going to take it back to the plight of child soldiers. I know it's statistics are dropping, but there's
in the world, no.
Not, I meant specifically in Uganda, specifically the LRA child soldiers. The statistics are dropping, but the long-term impact. You know, you've got a child who was abducted at 9 years old. You leave the Lord's Resistance Army, probably you're 30. You've lost a whole life. All you've known is either you were assigned to being a child kidnapper, either you were assigned to killing people. You know, each child had a different role. I think there were 5 very specific roles that were assigned. Those children, what's happening to them today? They're adults. They've lost a whole life.
It's what you touched on earlier. What making child soldiers in any situation robs humanity of a generation of skilled individuals. Robs us more than a generation. In the case of the LRA, 86. Right? How many generations have we lost of individuals, of artists, of scientists? How many have we lost? And that is just a child. That is the child going through this. There's the families.
Yes.
There's the cultures. At the LRA. So these villages, these parents that were farmers and in their respective villages, very, content in their way of life. I've had to be moving to cities where they don't quite fit in.
They don't belong. They've lost everything.
They don't belong there. They belong the rhythm. The men, because they've lost their identity of what they see as well, we are in Uganda, the sea.
You keep saying that.
A very patriarchal setting.
For the man who's a farmer, who he moves to the city, he can't do that.
He can't be the man he intends to be.
He can't do anything else. So you end up with a people where there's no fathers, and the women have to take over. And the men become criminals. There's
another angle to this that I think needs to be looked at in Nkululeko. So statistically, there were about 30,000 children between 1988 and 2004 that were actually abducted by the Lord's Resistance Army. So I'm sure that statistic is even much higher coming into 2017 and 18 and 19. But in Nkululeko, rehabilitation. I read about a lady. So slowly people are starting to talk because they've escaped the Lord's Resistance Army. So there's this lady who was quite young. Her name is Evelyn Amoni. I read her book. She was a Choli, quite like Kony. She was abducted. I think she was 15 or 14. She was abducted for the specific purpose of being Joseph Kony's wife. So he's got a whole lot of wives and quite a lot of young girls were abducted and they went into early marriages. They've lost their whole childhood. They've become parents, and obviously a lot of deaths in that situation. What's the out for these women who are now, saying, I can't stand this, I've had to raise my child what's the out for them in general society? How do they rehabilitate?
Look, Chiwa, I wish there was an out. Once a person has lost those formative years, people don't understand. Human being, you look at every animal that any animal that the in the process of evolution, every animal depends on a certain peculiar skill or peculiar ability in order to survive in this world. So snakes will depend almost entirely on the ability to deliver venom.
Yeah.
And the last thing they develop when they are born is the ability to deliver venom, because it's important, it takes longer. Your dogs or animals in the dog family develop the ability to smell last, because it is the one thing they're most dependent on to survive. So they will smell where their food is, they will smell danger and so forth. It is their survival. Human beings depend on the ability to reason, to think. So we are not fully formed in our brain when we are born. It's the only part of our brain that is still developing and adding cells. And that's growing until you're 21. And if your early experiences are loaded with all of this violence, the part of your brain that develops is the part that's away from reasoning. It's the part that's associated with violence, like reason and so forth. So you now have a brain that you will carry for all your life, and is not trained for peace, is not trained for reason, is not trained for this life that we have. It's trained in a different way. So you have, look, just don't have child soldiers.
Just don't have child soldiers, absolutely.
You can't bring them back.
You can't, but then again, even with adults in Rwanda, those that are still going through rehabilitation, they still go back into killing mode. It's a very contentious subject, and I hope we can have another discussion another day.
Just one thing before I finish.
Close off about the play, please, when you finish that point.
Okay, cool. One more thing I would like to say about this, there's no way out. A lot of children, once they've left the LRA and gone back home and seen how different it is, how their families have been displaced and whatnot, choose to come back to the LRA because they actually understand this world. You know, I mean, the brain has been developed to just
that's where they're more accepted. That's what they know. Evelyn Amoni said that in her book as well. So we're looking forward to seeing Fargon. I'm looking forward to Nkululeko's family coming too.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah, so Fargon is showing at Theatre Deli, who help supporting us and the Arts Council. Thank you very much. 29th of May to the 1st of June, and.
And you're on Facebook, Instagram.
We're on Facebook, Instagram. You can find us. Tickets are available online. I mean, come see the show. We come see the show.
Thank you, John. We will come to see the show. Thank you very much, Nkululeko and John, for joining me this evening. It's been African Voices coming to you on child soldiers in Uganda. Thank you.